Hello and welcome to the Mindful Men podcast, a show inspiring men to be mindful about their lives. Each week, we'll dive into a range of topics that matter to men and hear from everyday people doing extraordinary things. So if you love the show, please give it a 5-star rating and share it with your mates. Now, before we get into this week's episode, please note that some of the content may trigger you. And if this happens, please reach out to your support networks. It's really important. If you can't get enough of Mindful Men, head over to our website. It's www.mindful-men.com.au. Find the show notes and the links to our socials there. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's get mindful. G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rennie, and today we're getting mindful about stage 3 cancer and turning pain into purpose. And joining me for today's discussion, we've got Savio P. Clemente from New York. How are you going, Savio?
Hi, Simon. How are you? Thank you so much for the invitation to be on.
Oh, really excited to be here. I have checked out your TEDx speech, which prompted me to reach out and have you on the show. It is an amazing speech, and it goes for, I think, is it 9 minutes, 10 minutes roughly. And I'm going to ask everybody to either pause this right now and go watch that, or at the end of this, go watch that as well. And I'll put the link in the show notes. So really excited to have you on the show and for you to share your story. But to introduce you further than that, you are a TEDx speaker, you're a journalist, you're a board-certified wellness coach, a best-selling author, and obviously a stage 3 cancer survivor. And I love this little quote that you've got that you run by, is that you empower individuals who are facing adversity to unearth the profound truth: to know thyself is to heal thyself. I love that because the Mindful Men podcast, the whole point of it is to help guys to pause and reflect about how they're showing up in life in whatever area that is, whether it's their health, their mental health, their careers, their parenting journeys, or their family journeys. And so I think when we go deep, we uncover a lot more about what we need to not just survive, but to start thriving again as well. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate that you focused on that. That is a singular thread through everything that I do, and it's really motivates me to move further along with it.
I guess let's start talking about cancer, and let's define what blood cancer is. We've all heard different types of cancer. We've had cancer survivors on the show before, but for anyone who isn't familiar what blood cancer is, can you just let us know what that is to start off with?
Sure. So a blood cancer is a cancer that affects the blood, to make it very simply. Mine was, in fact, stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was actually classified as diffuse large B-cell. Now, since getting the diagnosis, I know a lot about diffuse large B-cell, but before that, I had no clue. And of course, I know individuals who have had leukemia as well, and that's a pretty aggressive type of blood cancer as well. And the thing with blood cancers, and most of the doctors that I had, I remember counting, I was in the hospital for 15 days. They said there's really no origin story with blood cancers. They just don't know. In my family, maternally and paternally, there was no signs of blood cancer at all. So it was a mystery to them. And to a large degree, they told me back in 2014, which is when I got diagnosed, that if there was a cancer to get, this was the cancer to get, which I thought was odd because no one wants cancer, because they said that the biologics and immunotherapies that they had would be able to help heal me. So I was confident in that ability.
When did you see signs or symptoms that were leading you to even be in the hospital for that long as well? Can you talk us through like the lead up and then, what prompted you to go and say, something's not quite right here?
So most people, when they ask me, like, you had cancer, they're like, oh, your life was terrible, things went wrong. No, actually, physically, I was doing pretty well. I was working out 6 days a week, strength training, boxing, spinning. I was eating organic foods. I was a long-time meditator. I meditated about 20 minutes a day. I kept stress under wraps. So physically, I was doing well. Emotionally and mentally, I have to be honest, I really wasn't, because I was in a business partnership, passion project, so to speak, and it wasn't going well. That in itself, I think, was probably not the root cause of it, but I think it didn't help the situation. So the way it showed up was I was on a trip with a friend. I was in Amsterdam, Paris, and London, and I kept getting these drenching night sweats. And I was like, this is odd. I'm like, well, maybe it's the environment. Came back to the States, had them again, and I'm like, okay, something's wrong. At that point, my stomach started getting distended. It started getting bigger and bigger, which I thought was really odd as well. I ended up seeing a naturopath who I've been seeing for a number of years. He basically analyzes my blood work. He tells me what vitamin structure to take, what food diet to have. And he goes and he looks and he's like, this could be many things, my friend. I suggest you get a sonogram. I ended up getting a sonogram and they would not let me leave the office. They ended up telling me to have a relative pick me up. I went to the hospital. They insisted I go there. Literally within an hour and a half, I was admitted to the 5th floor. And that same night, I heard nurses speaking in whispered voices that I would be transferred to the 7th floor, which they call the cancer floor. So that's when I knew I had some level of cancer. I didn't know what it was, what stage. It was only until the next day when basically they had to put a nephrostomy tube in me in order to distend the liquid that the doctor whispered in my ear that it was diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. So that's how it came. Usually when people are told they have cancer, they have time to deliberate. They have time to get a second opinion. I was whisked from sonogram to 5th floor to 7th floor. Then I was bedridden for a week because of the nephrostomy tube. And then I was in the hospital for an additional 6 days. And of those 6 days, 3 days before I left, the medical director came to me and she said, let's have a heart to heart. I know your medical history. I know you don't even take aspirin, but I'm telling you, you got to start your first round of chemo. If you don't, I don't think you'll be here.
On that, like, did you say, let's just get into it? Or like, did you hesitate? Like, what was your thought process like?
I trusted on a good friend. Of course, when you're in the hospital, you have access to Wi-Fi, your phone. So I called a good friend of mine who I considered extremely wise. And she said to me, are you sure you want to like start this? Because chemo ravages everything, the good and the bad. It just destroys. And I had to really take a step back and I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And I'm going to tell this story. It's going to seem a little crazy or woo-woo or whatever, but I ended up getting a flash of insight from a movie that I saw back in the early 90s. It was a movie, and I detail this in my TEDx talk, which is Little Buddha. It stars Keanu Reeves as Siddhartha, which is a little Buddha. And he basically gave up all his worldly possessions. He ends up meditating with 2 other ascetics. They live on like 1 grain of rice a day. And he overhears 2 individuals on a fishing boat, an older and a younger individual. The older person has an instrument in his hand. And he says to the younger person, if you hold the string too tight, it will snap. And if you leave it too slack, it won't play. The path is the middle way. And I was like, oh my God. So I can say yes to this chemo thing, but I can do other things. And so I vowed to do as much integrated modalities from ozone therapy to energy work to reading the Quran and getting insights on healing to Hawaiian healing. And my story goes that after 6 rounds of chemo, the first round of chemo was in the hospital. I did 5 additional rounds every 3 weeks. In between those 3 weeks, I did that whole bunch of integrated modalities, and I was able to beat my diagnosis in 4.5 months. This past December in 2023, I've been 9 years in remission.
That's incredible. And it was very fast. Like, it seems like everybody at the moment either has had cancer or knows somebody who has had cancer or has got cancer. What was it like for the loved ones in your family, like family, friends, like for them to digest it and to see you go through what you went through?
I think it was twofold. So one, they know I'm a fiercely independent person. In my early 20s, graduating college, I took a trip to Sydney and I took to Melbourne by myself, just went there. And I said, I'm fiercely independent. And they honored that aspect of me because I said to them, I love that you're concerned. And they were actually a great cheerleader because they believe wholeheartedly that I would beat this. They like, no doubt. They're like, if anyone was getting it, you. And that was great. But I also felt a lot of pressure, to be honest. And I felt a lot of shame with my cancer, a lot of vulnerability with my cancer. So I felt like I had to carry the cross by myself. I had to find a way to the path of least resistance with this. And I like focused like a laser beam on it. But of course, these things creep up and I didn't know what the outcome would be. I just knew for myself, as long as I did what I needed to do, then the rest is really not up to me. And when I got my remission status, it was 5 days before Christmas. I remember before I had that test, I remember saying just to myself, if this doesn't turn out the way it is, then it is what it is. I don't know what else more I can do because I literally did everything I could. I even had a Google alert set to my disease to know exactly what's happening in the world because there was no TikTok at the time, to have to know what's exactly happening in my world in order to beat it. But it was only years later that I actually attended a men's retreat, which I didn't even know, but it's called Men's Work. It was something that was just starting in 2019, and it was 18 different men. And I was shocked because we did exercises in like, it sounds a little weird, but it's just eye gazing with another man, non-sexual, just eye gazing. And that in itself is just, it really changes your dimensionally thinking of another man. We also did where we put hands on each other's hearts, and then there was an attunement with the heartbeats, which was really odd too. So it was years later that I had to unravel a lot of the emotional and the mental aspects of cancer. But initially, I just knew that I had to throw the kitchen sink at it for myself. And I don't tell people to do that. It was just my own path and what I felt like I needed to do.
You mentioned shame. And you felt a lot of shame. Like, can you explain that for us? Because it's something that, as you said, like there was no origin story to it. It's not as if you had led a path of absolute abuse of your body. And in fact, you were actually living quite healthily. Where did the shame come in, do you think?
I think at this point, speaker and author Brene Brown would have a field day with me. But no, the shame for me was really, I don't know if I ever feared the aspect of death. So I grew up Catholic, but I studied many comparative belief systems from Buddhism to spiritualism. And I just know that this is a shell. This is an experience that we're having, that I'm having. And so I'm not really fearful of the death aspect of it. What I was fearful of is that I fucked up. Like, I screwed something up. I didn't live up to my potential. I didn't live up to responsibilities that I have in the world. That was the shame. It was people seeing me as less than. As a matter of fact, my sister, I have two sisters, one in California, actually was in town at the time, which is very odd, is when I got diagnosed. She actually wanted everyone to come, cousins, uncles. And I was like, no, 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 no. I would feel like a zoo animal. That's not going to help me. That's going to make me feel powerless. And I know when it comes to anything in your life, if you feel a lack of power in any degree, you're not going to be able to sustain the effort it takes to do something. I knew that inherently. And I also knew something with that, even though chemo wasn't a favorite thing in my mind, I reframed it as an elixir. I saw it as something that was going to help me rather than destroy what it needs to destroy. So those are the things that really bubbled up to the surface. It wasn't years later until I really unraveled a lot of it that I realized that most of the shame was really self-imposed, and it was things that I just didn't release or let go of.
You hit on such a great point there, because in my own story, which is, over 30 years of mental health, and in the work that I do with guys as a therapist as well, it's that same point. It's like they've been living with this thing like shame, or like the immense stigma associated with whatever they're going through, but they don't realize it until they start doing the inner work, the reflection, which is often after an event and many years afterwards, and they hold on to it and they're not sure how to name it or what it is. And I guess it's that mind-body connection, isn't it? It's we feel and experience certain things in our bodies. It's the way our minds really process that in the moment, but also after the moment, that can help us to grow. I'd love to hear your thoughts on connecting the mind body and really embracing the inner work to start, I guess, looking at things from a different perspective, as opposed to this is like a death sentence, looking at this as how can I get through this? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So one of the, I think, positive things, if you can label it positive, out of COVID, is this talk that people are okay with talking about mental health. I love that aspect of it, because that's so refreshing. And it's also refreshing to know that people are hurting, right? I'm not okay is an okay thing to say now. It probably wasn't before, especially for when it comes to men. In terms of what they could do for the mind-body connection, obviously there's many things that I do in resources. You could do things as simple as prayer, meditation, going and walking out in nature, allowing yourself to journal, breathing, chanting, many things. But what I like, and I highlighted in my TEDx talk, is my 7 minutes to wellness. So my TEDx talk is called 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger. And I use a framework that I built, and it was based on this healing in Hawaii called Huna healing. And really, Huna healing is really about talking to different parts of your body. There's anecdotal evidence that, and I use something called the three brains, which is head, heart, and gut, that has some level of knowingness, some level of consciousness, that has some level of wisdom that we just really have to tap into. And as a journalist, one of the things that I did is I introduced an idea to my editor about, let's talk to cancer survivors. And so he's like, okay, that's interesting. So he thought of a great title, I Survived Cancer, Here's How I Did It. And in the interview series, I asked a very pivotal question. I said, if cancer had a message for you, what would that message be? And they were like, what the hell? And that's what I use, like my journal and my coach aspect to answer that, because they're like, what are you talking about? I just wanted it away from me. I'm like, could it teach you something? Is there something in it that it showed you that you didn't see, that you didn't want to see, that you couldn't? And they're like, wow, that's really, profound. But so basically, it's called the Aloha Reboot. And A stands for acknowledge. Acknowledge where you are. Don't pretend. Don't, dissuade. L stands for listening. So listen to that inner voice. In Huna healing, they actually talk about talking to those parts of the body. I don't profess people do that in the public because you might be considered strange. O, very important, especially after all the people that I've interviewed, is opening yourself up to self-compassion and self-forgiveness, because one of the offshoots of Huna healing is called Ho'oponopono. And it's just affirmation that you can say about, I love myself, I forgive myself, I release those things that I need to release. H stands for harnessing. So harness that wisdom that you accumulated. And A stands for acting. So acting with purpose. And I say that's the best way to get to the mind-body connection, because it's really always an inside job. It's like the external world is great and we respond to the external world, but our internal world is really the decision-making process. It really what guides our efforts, guides our motivations, and guides our desires.
How important was that going through your chemo? It takes a toll on the body and the mind. Like, how important was that for you to keep driving through?
So the idea of the stranger came to me in 2014. It was only literally 9 years later that I got on the TED stage to talk about it, because I saw my physical body dying, but I also saw like my mental acuity still there. My emotions were still alive. I had great relational aspects with friends and family who came to visit me. I also had vivid dreams, and I had a connection to spirituality, my own connection to my divinity or my soul. And so for me, I really knew that I had to pull the Savio that was like physically dying there. I had to pull him through that. So I compartmentalized. I said, okay, the doctors are doing the physical thing. I'll do all that stuff. I'll do the chemo 6 hours and all that stuff. I'll do my integrated modalities. But what can I control and what can I not control? I can't control the test. I don't know. I can control my emotions, and I can control my day-to-day thought processes. I can control, meditation, spending time, with that. I can control how I feel about this. Even though I didn't know how to unravel all that, I knew I had some level of that. And it's funny because, or interesting, because I actually was on a panel where it's a stage 4 pancreatic cancer patients. So not survivors. So it's not my audience, because I mostly deal with survivors or those facing adversity who've overcome it in order to get on with their lives and create and lead with new power. And one of them said, it's just over. They told me I only have a few months to live. And I said to him, well, if I waved a magic wand and took away the cancer right now to you, what would you do? And he like rattled off 3 or 4 things. I'm like, can you have just a little bit of movement with some of those things? Because yeah, I think I can. I'm like, because at the end of the day, it's not over until it's over. There's always hope. And at least then you feel that you have some level of assertiveness or power in creating and making those moves. So for me, those things are very important, but it's not as easy or as simple. This was a process. I unraveled this, and I'm still unraveling a lot, because a lot of people think that once you survive cancer, like it's over. No, you have a whole care team that wants you to like survive it. Once you survive it, you're literally on your own. Your friends and family don't understand unless they've been through it. So I work in that space of allowing people to really maximize what that vision is for themselves, because vision is very important. It's not a goal, it's a vision. It's how you want to feel, how you want to be in that space.
You mentioned you're feeling really alone after you've beat cancer. Like, how was that for you? Like that sense of loneliness, and how did you overcome that?
After 200 cancer survivor interviews, I'll be honest, a lot of people leaned on their community. I didn't do any of that. I'll be honest. I mean, my parents were there for me. My sisters were there for me. Friends who knew were there for me. But I just am built differently. And I just knew for myself that, and probably it was the shame and the vulnerability that I wasn't ready to face. But a lot of them used their community as, like, one of them was really ingenious. They're like, they kept asking me about my cancer. So I just brought them to my doctor's appointment, and they acted like my scribe because I couldn't retain everything the doctor was telling me to do. Wonderful. Another person said that another person just, reassured them that cancer doesn't have to be a death sentence. And that was like a through line throughout most of the interviews that I did. But the alone part was also something that I hone on a lot. And it goes back to echoing that idea, to know thyself is to heal thyself. Healing does not always occur in the ways that we think it does. It occurs, it doesn't have to be in the medical office, it doesn't have to be in the chemo bay. It could be in moments that we don't know, because it's a mysterious thing. People have been seeking healing throughout time. It's just one of those things that we have to really fall into alignment with and allow ourselves to be in alignment with. as well.
And so when was those first moments, I guess, that you noticed in yourself that you were healing, that you were getting through this and coming out the other side?
I chuckle because I remember after the third chemo, so I had to do 6 rounds, 1 in the hospital. And I remember after my third one, I just knew for myself that something clicked. I'm not saying that I knew that I was healed, definitely not. But I remember saying to my doctor, I'm like, I actually feel fine. I was actually working out, by the way. I lost eyebrows, I lost my hair. Now it's a badge of courage. I'm like, oh, that saves me so much time. Wonderful. I'm going to keep it. And people are like, looks great on me. Like, wonderful. It just reminds me of what I've been through as well, like in a good way, not in a bad way. Because I look at cancer as something that it gave me rather than something it took away from me. Because I had a blood cancer and I tell people like, I don't have any scars with my blood. My veins were so good. I didn't even need a port, which was amazing. But the people I've interviewed, they lost breasts, they lost colons, they've lost throats, they've lost stuff that they can't pretend it's not there. It is not there. And you have to live with that. So I'm very empathetic and very compassionate with that because I understand what it's like to want something and not have it happen. I've lost many people to cancer as well, but I think it's our duty as survivors to carry the torch forward in every way we can to be as authentic as we can in order to do that. So I just strive to do that on a daily basis. But just generally, I think the most important thing is for people to just really allow themselves to be embraced by what has happened to them rather than feel like what has happened to them is a negative thing that has happened to them. Because we all suffer horrible things in our lives, but I think it's how we respond to the horrible things is what makes the difference.
A bit of time's passed since your remission and that experience. Looking back, like where do you feel like you've grown the most? Like what parts of you have really grown exponentially?
I would probably say the parts of me that have grown exponentially would probably be my emotional self. So if you believe in astrology, I'm a Pisces, Aquarius, I'm a water sign, I'm a touchy-feely, but there's a difference between feeling and emotions. And I think I was very good at feeling, but not really good at expressing emotions, right? Hence the shame and the vulnerability and wanting to do it myself and feeling like I'm a male and I got to just do this and figure it out and all that. And maybe there's some repressed things from childhood that I didn't really unpack. But I think now in having conversations with people, because after that 200 interview series, it became a best-selling book where I took 35 stories, told my own story. And now I've spoken to people like Venus Williams, like the epitome of sports. And she talks about her gastrointestinal issues. And I'm like, wow. And she's like, yeah, she built a wellness brand called Happy Viking from her pain, talked to celebrities, been flown to Italy and India with National Geographic and, talked about wellness and what that actually means. It's just an interesting thing that happened because I don't know if I would ever classify my cancer as a blessing, but it did open up a whole new world that I didn't even know. And I think it's because I allowed myself to be emotionally invested in what I was doing. And I allowed that this story that has happened to me to be a baton that I can move forward in my life.
And you mentioned before, like you're a very individualized kind of person, individual person. Did it going through this open you up to more community-based version of yourself, someone who is embracing other people to come in and support and help? Did you find that change in you?
It did. It's why I'm a coach. I mean, I know how to create a container. I tell people all the time, I'm not a therapist. I'm a coach. I know my lane. Coaches are where you are, where you want to go. What's that vision you want to create? But just allowing myself to be embraced in that conversation using active listening and allowing myself to just feel and sense and know, using my expertise and my training in order to do that as well. And also being part of a men's group. When COVID hit, I was part of an online men's group. We met every week and talking and allowing people to express who and what they're feeling and sensing. And I think people are just on this search for just not only connection with others, but connection with themselves. And that's why people go on plant medicine expeditions, because it's all about the internal world that they're trying to sort out and figure out, because something in the external world is not lining up properly.
What drew you to the men's group? I'm interested in this because for so many men, and myself included, so I've only got into men's groups the last couple of years, and from a deep sense of loneliness and needing connection, both with myself and other guys as well. We are a bit stubborn in our way, some guys. many guys, and we don't want to share, particularly with other men. We feel like that is like, nah, that's just too woo-woo. I'm not going to go there. What drew you to that space? Because for me, it was the ability to connect and open up and start letting go of these parts of myself that told me it wasn't okay to talk about this type of stuff.
Truthfully, I was hurting. After 5 years, you're told by your oncologist that your cancer is less likely to occur. I knew that I had a point, a direction that I needed to go. I didn't know if that was going to be the new direction to go. I knew something was forcing me or pushing me towards that. And I saw a men's group as a way to just get more comfortable with the world around me, with the people that I surround myself with. How am I supposed to do that if I don't understand the language or understand the context, or I don't even understand what men's work is? So I really went in curious and I came out completely transformed. I mean, when you see guys are crying that you don't even know about deep wounds or trauma, it was held by people who knew what they were doing. It really shakes you up. And then you're doing something like eye gazing. Like, what the hell is that? And it's very odd because you do feel this human to human connection and contact when you just let your guard down. I also saw it as a way for me to, like I mentioned earlier, about catching and releasing. I firmly believe in two ethos. Number one is something that I strive to do every time. It's this idea of the empty pot. So come into conversations and situations with an empty pot. That's very hard for experts like you and me who hold on to our knowledge and want to make sure that it's delivered the way it's supposed to be delivered. But if you come into it, you just really realize that we all share a profound alignment with each other that would never happen if we constantly want to get the information out. So that's number one. And number two, which is a work in progress, by the way, is this idea of, it's like if the pot is completely full, you can't fill any more in it. So it's always about letting go and adding, keeping yourself fresh and buoyant. And that's very hard as well for me because we rely on not only the bad stuff that happened to us in terms of informing what we don't want to do, but the good stuff that happened to us, we want to like savor it and keep it. But I really find that it just allows me to be just so much more present in the here and now.
Let's talk about the being present in the here and now and that present moment awareness. And I feel like an important factor of healing is having hope that something's going to change for the better. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the importance of hope, but also how that aligns with something like resilience as well.
So hope and resilience, right? They're two in the same. One of my favorite movies besides Little Buddha was Shawshank Redemption. It was really a great movie because it was hope never dies, right? There's always some level of it. And I think resilience is just, I had an interview series called Rising to Resilience, interviewed probably about 125 thought leaders and experts in that field. And of course, we know what it mostly is, right? Bouncing back in the face of adversity, you just rise. But resilience, I often found in those interviews, was about this level of gratitude, this little slant of gratitude, because what do you be resilient for? Like, what's the gratefulness in that? And then in my trainings with a University of Pennsylvania professor, Dr. Siegelman mentioned that when you talk about gratitude, you have to ask yourself the question, why are you grateful for that particular thing that you say you're grateful for? It adds this level. So I'm grateful for the fact that I can travel as much as I can. Why am I grateful for that? Oh, because I built a business that allows me to do that because it's a passion of mine, whatever the case may be. But it just allows that other aspect. So resilience, gratefulness is one and the same. Obviously, that's forged by just what you know. Fortunately for us, we have tools and resources nowadays, online access that we can grab at any time, anywhere. It might be too much. It might be overstimulation. And here in the States, TikTok might be banned. And unlike other people who watch TikTok maybe to just amuse themselves, I use it solely for education. The algorithm is amazingly, frighteningly stupendous for me because I learned so much from just learning from other people in that regard. And when it comes to hope, yeah, that's a hard one. In my journey in the hospital, I had 4 roommates over the course of 15 days. 2 of them had brain cancer. And the last person who was there also had brain cancer, and he had to have radiation the next day. And he was yelling, screaming, not very nice to the nurses and doctors. He wanted to leave. And I was like, okay. I was like, I don't know you. I'm sorry if this is not kosher for me to say, but what are you rushing home for? Like, why do you want to leave? You have radiation tomorrow. He's like, I'm like, you're here for healing, aren't you? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I want to go and see my dog. And so I really odd. So he left the room, ended up talking to her friend. And she goes, Savio, my friend, you don't understand. And I'm like, what? She goes, you are just a different perspective. You have a different mentality when it comes to this. You know that you want to get out and do these things. He's scared he's going to die. And I'm like, oh my God, he has no hope. He has no hope. And so that really was one of the grittiest lessons I learned. True empathy and compassion was that moment when that friend said that to me, because that's when I realized, oh my God, that hope is something that we all say that we want, but in order to cultivate it, it really takes a lot of work to do.
Imagine that you're talking now to someone who's just received their diagnosis and they're being moved up the levels in the hospital and they're, shit scared, like they're freaking out. How would you, based on your story, instill a little bit of hope so that they can go up there with a bit of confidence, maybe, even if it's the most minuscule bit? What would you say to them in that moment?
I would say a few things. So number one, I would first try to assess what is the actual diagnosis. Number two, did you get a second opinion? And I think it's very important because science is science and medicine is medicine. And we're very good with the technology aspect of identifying what's going on. But you also should get a second opinion because then you know who your care team will be, because that's very important. So that's number one. So that's the physical aspect, right? So you got that pretty much over. Then I would tell them to assess what's going on in your emotions right now. Like literally just do an inventory list of what's actually happening. You don't have to show anyone it. Do it in your own, on paper or on your phone, whatever. Mentally, what's happening in your head? Like, I know you're scared, but just write it all down. Just write it all down. Then I would actually say, do your homework. Do your research on the disease, the good, the bad, the ugly. Find out what's going on. And then the simplest thing I would say is ask yourself the most profound question of all. What can you control in this situation? And what can't you control in this situation? You can't control what the care team is going to, now that you said the care team that you want, and they're going to do all these tests and inject you and take blood and all this other stuff they're going to do. What can you control? Can you control the fact that you, to a large degree, didn't have that conversation with someone that you should have or might have or could have? Number one. Number two, what are your thoughts on the afterlife? Just generally, do you believe in just nothingness? So if it's nothingness, write that down. Allow yourself to feel and sense and be in that moment. And the third thing is probably something that someone recently said to me. She called me up on the phone. She actually was a massage therapist. I did a coverage in Vermont, and she was massaging me, and she just found out she had cancer. And she said to me, she goes, listen, I've had such a hard life, like all my life. She's like, I'm thinking to myself, I know your story. You've expressed it. I've read your book. She goes, I don't know if I want to go through this. And honestly, Simon, I was even thinking to myself, what should I do in this situation, right? I'm not coaching her. I'm just talking to her. Like, I could have agreed with her. I could have been like, yeah, it's hard as nails. You've had a hard life. But of course, that's not the right thing to do. Of course, I wouldn't do it. But I said to her, well, what are you fighting for? She goes, what do you mean? I go, well, if you make it through this, what do you hope to have in your life? And so I would say that allow yourself to feel that vision or to see that vision, or to, even if it's a vision you can't fully realize, to allow yourself to just look towards that vision. And so those are the three things I would say.
I love that. You reminded me of this a saying that I always say to guys I work with is knowledge is power. Like, they come to me with their diagnoses, and my role is to be that container and hold that space and allow them to process that, but then also give them, I guess, strategies to both be in the moment, but also look forward to the future. And a lot of that comes with knowledge, just what's going on, what could happen, what might happen, but then also allowing yourself to come back into the moment and just go, I'm here right now, experiencing this right now. What do you do to be right in the moment? I know you said meditation before, but like, what was something that you drew on that could allow you to not look too far ahead, but also just appreciate where you were at that present moment?
I think it's part of the tenets of positive psychology. So this idea of manage the situation despite outward circumstances. Meditation is something I do 20 minutes a day. It really sets the tone for the rest of my day. But I also firmly believe in looking towards some guiding force. It doesn't have to be a religion base. It could just be something as the universe or God or a spiritual figure in your life as being a guidepost for where you want to go and see. I know you probably get this all the time. People come to you and probably say, what's my purpose? Especially after cancer. Like, okay, now what? I survived it. Now what? And I'm like, well, okay. I'm like, that's such a loaded question, purpose. And I'm like, and then I challenge them a little bit. I go, well, okay, well, think about it. What's the purpose of all of us on a giant rock in space floating? We know there's other planets around us. They're really far away. We really can't get to them. What's the purpose collectively of all of us here? And they're like, why you ask me that? I'm like, because why does purpose have to be so individual? Why can't it be a collective purpose? Why can't it just be by sharing, learning, growing, allowing ourselves to see, be felt, be seen, allowing ourselves to even have different opinions, have a unifying presence, even with our diverse feelings about stuff, especially here in the States. And I'm like, that should really inform me. So I look towards the bigger questions as allowing me to become present in my everyday. I love exercise, so I do that a lot. I'm trying to get more nature-based. It's not really a thing of mine, but I'm trying really hard to do that. But I just think allowing yourself to always have a macro vision rather than always a micro vision of what you want to do.
I love that shared purpose as well. I guess that it sings out to me, your book, around all the stories. Is the shared purpose of the collective stories, and the shared purpose of you sharing your story now, which will go out to the audience for the Mindful Men community and more. And that in itself instills hope and demonstrates resilience and shines a light on something that can be pretty shitty.
And that's why I chose the 35 stories, because at the end, I put QR codes, not because I wanted them just self-promote themselves. I wanted people to know these people survived, they're living, and they're thriving. They actually are doing things with what happened to them. They're charity organizations, building businesses, becoming leaders. They're doing things in the real world. And I wanted people to understand that your disease doesn't have to define you. It's something we don't want, but it happened. And we have to accept it. Just because we accept it, now we have to respond to it. And when we respond to it, we can respond to it powerfully.
Absolutely. And I'll put the link to the book in the show notes as well. I'd love for people to check that out and read that for themselves. But I'm interested in your coaching business as well, the work that you do as a coach. Can you share us a little bit about that? Plug the business, what you do, how it works, and let us know how the business goes.
Sure. So I mostly work with, most of my clients are cancer survivors, because I really love that realm of people who face some level of adversity, but now I've had to open up because of my TEDx talk. I've gotten a lot of people interested. So I just empower individuals who, aspiring leaders who have gone through some level of medical adversity, to just unleash their full potential in a way that just makes them unstoppable. And that just forms this idea of, people talk about burnout and people talk about not being recognized or not being seen in the right way. And I just really allow them to see a bigger, greater version of what they want to create, allow them to build something off of the pain and create purpose out of it. And because I've done a book and TEDx talk, I'm a journalist who've interviewed at this point over 2,000 thought leaders and experts. I allow people to say to themselves, well, how do you want to tell your story? How do you want your story to be amplified in that manner? And so that's the work that I do. It gives me the most immense joy, because I really firmly believe that if we all speak, then that gets amplified in a larger way.
Awesome. And is that available worldwide?
It is available worldwide. Most of my clients are online, thanks to the power of Zoom. I have a 90-day coaching program. At this point, I think I have 2 spots left, because as you know, I do a lot and I'm trying to manage a lot, but I also want to be there for my clients as well. So
awesome. Right. Well, and I'll put the link in the show notes to the coaching business. But Savio, this has been an amazing conversation, and you're so upbeat, and I love it, and it shines through, and you've got so much energy, which is fantastic. We do talk about some heavy things on the show, and we've talked about, cancer and so forth today. I'd always like to leave it on a bit of a more of a positive note, something to leave the audience with, so they can maybe go check it out for themselves and end their day feeling really good. And that plug, if you could call it that, is just what's lighting you up at the moment. Is it something you're watching on telly, listening to on the radio? Are you reading something? Are you doing a self-care activity? What's lighting you up at the moment?
I love that. It really informs the individual to take onus, right, of how do you want to create. So many people respond to what happened to them rather than say, no, I can create it in the here and now. And I was on a call with someone recently. They're like, I've met so many cancer survivors. You have like a lot of vitality. I'm like, well, I'm glad it shows. It's not an act. It's really how I try to be in the everyday world. But I think it's also about really finding, right, that shared purpose or that alignment with what it is. And if people want to check me out, they can go to my website, saviopclemente.com. The social media, I'm at The Human Resolve. At the end of the day, if I could leave your audience with probably one thing, it would be, I think our internal world really dictates what happens in our external world. And so the more that you can create beauty within the internal, the more that it shines through.
Love that. So profound and simple and beautiful at the same time. Savio, thanks so much for getting mindful about cancer with me. And we've touched on a whole bunch of things, and I've got a whole bunch more questions, but I'm going to leave it there for another day and wish you all the best for the rest of your day.
Thank you, Simon. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode, and I hope you got some value from it. If anything triggered your mental health today, please reach out to your support networks. Also, if you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your mates. For more from Mindful Men, you can check us out on Instagram and YouTube, and I'll throw the links to these pages in the show notes below. But until next time, stay mindful.